So in Hamshach Ayin Beis, we're middle of chapter 287, Ayin Beis Volume. It's the top of page 582, Tovkuf Pei Beis. But as usual, we want to have the big picture and the small picture, so to speak. Context is what it's called. Okay, so a question has been posed at the table. Ayin Beis Volume Shmei? Yeah. Okay. For those of you that view this video in 500 years from now, know that there were certain individuals that were sitting around a table and discussing these matters. Listen, all this is going to be part of the record. Aha, when Mashiach comes, it's not going to disappear.
100%.
Okay, so we're part of the future as we speak. The less narishkeit we speak, the more we speak Ayin Beis, the more we're part of the future. Guaranteed. Okay, so the question is, this whole discussion, first the mile of Eidos, the virtue of Eidos, then the virtue of containers, and now this is not enough, and that's not enough, and back and forth. What's going on? And the Fermatzmus is another perspective. Is that actually...
Yeah.
Okay.
Seems like there's a different entity that's making it happen.
One second.
Yeah, go ahead.
So as good Jews, one question we ask with another question, and we answer with another question. And there's nothing wrong with asking. Obviously we have the complete Kabbalah sale and we accept what the Rabbi did. But nevertheless they wanted us to understand what they did. Just like the Eibishter wants us to understand how he did it. So obviously, in Le Machshavei Seichem, that their mind and their ideas are beyond us, but they wanted us to comprehend. So why would the Rebbe Rashab spend years building, structuring, constructing, and then writing Ayin Beis? So we discussed this. As the plot emerges, it's clearly, like Chassidus in general. First of all, it's to give people like us and our seichel of nefesh habamis, plain logic, the intelligence that a human being has, ability to comprehend godliness. And the more you comprehend it, the more it becomes your reality. So instead of material life being your pshittus, your obvious reality, Chassidus gives that taste. But in Ayin Beis particularly, clearly the Rambam of Chassidus is collecting all the fundamental subjects that Alter Rebbe laid out and all the Rabbeim built up, but putting it into a very big flow. And as we've discussed, interfaces is definitely the central component, how we retrace the steps. So if you speak about it purely, like if you talked about this from a mathematical point of view, a scientific point of view. So remember, science in general is man-made wisdom. It's understanding God's mind, but it's human beings' endeavor to understand, and therefore it's theories. And if Einstein says a theory, you can ask, 1 second, why do we need that part of the theory? When later he came and said something else. And sometimes you discard a theory. After a while, the theory doesn't have any validity. So first of all, we have to make the distinction that as much as this is seichel, this is not, God forbid, discardable. It's not theories. This is a revelation from above. As we even said, we learned this, that seichel is actually really higher than seichel, dressed up as seichel. It's masquerading as seichel. Now, say masquerading is not like deceiving, but it means even seichel itself is not really seichel. Seichel is godliness. One way it manifests is what we call a logical order, a logic. But as Einstein actually said, he said the most unreasonable thing of existence is that it's reasonable. Because if you really think about it, and if you really appreciate God, you say, really? The truth is, it shouldn't have been logical by little simple people by us. The fact that God could put his whole beyond existence into a structure existence that we can relate to is itself quite an achievement. That itself is bigger. So, and second thing is, it's not academic. I was trained, or my understanding is, you learn everything in Chassidus, every level has to be actionable in our lives right now. So there are times in our day when we are Eidos, and there are times when we're Kalim, and there are times where there's a conflict. If you look at the whole picture, there's one big conflict. And life is a battle, and you're trying to find that interface. We're all looking for the interface. I'm talking about people really engaging. The the Meraglim, the scouts had a problem with the interface. By then they said, yeah, we can interface, but it has to be in the wilderness. It can't be in the middle of the Wall Street. It's impossible. Eretz Echeles Yeshua. Others have a different way they do it. Some people say, like Noach, once he got into the teva, once he went into the ark, he didn't want to leave the ark. Or does he have to go back to a world that can become corrupt? There's that famous sikh from the Rebbe, same in that teva. Similar to the Meraglim idea. He wants to be inside now, he's been protected. Was he going to go? And they said inside the table was a taste of Mashiach. So bottom line is that if you think about it purely, then you could say, what is this, a game? Eris, a kale? No, life is complex. And life is multi-nuanced.
Let's unlock, and then dispense.
That's not relevant, by the way, to Ayin Beis.
Let's take care of that, Kaylee.
So the bottom line is that if you really learn Adaita de Nafshi, that every line, if you really want, you can stop every line and say, I can live my whole life just living up to this line, figuring out how it plays itself out. That's why I think a critical component to learning it is really looking at this as models in life. And let's talk real psychology here. I counsel people, I deal with people all the time. There's no two people that are alike. There's no one rule fits all. There's general principles. But like, for example, taking ideas from this and applying it to real life, it's different situations demand. Sometimes you meet somebody and the eris are exploding, but they've got problems with their containers. You meet another person, the containers are too powerful. And then you start seeing, so what you're really dealing with here is, if you think about it theoretically, it can be very like what is going on, but if you think of it as a map, what you're really learning is the map of existence. That's very complex and very gray areas, and there's constant battles and constant tension. You're trying to find a peace, because I can see, like, you can have one chapter where he talks the power of energy, and that can be applied to a certain situation. Then you have the power the other way, and then you bring them together. So I really think if everything was applied to our lives, it would be, you'd see right away that, of course, different situations, different scenarios. This expression is Wenzel Vumeret, that we also go, when we first discover it in yeshiva, and when you find a contradiction between Temaimorim and then the Mashpia says, it depends where you're talking. So it becomes a joke. Okay, if that's the case, because when you're children, you want to see everything like in a box. Is it square or is it a triangle? If someone tells you it depends what you're talking about, what do you mean? It can't be both. But that's not true. It's in the material world, things are not both. In the spiritual world, there's things that are both properties. It depends where you're talking, what situation. But we don't like that because it's less control, so to speak, and you have to sort of surrender more to the paradoxes of life. So I really think that's why it's like that. Like the Rebbe, I remember, used to ask the question very often. Shavuos, you learn, my mother, Shavuos is the highest level. Pesach is the highest. Sukkot is the highest level. And the Rebbe's answer was that everyone is correct. The day of Shavuos, that's the shah, the gate, everything goes through it. And I remember the answer is not just a technical answer. If you're not living Shavuos personally, yeah. So I can learn a Shavuos by Imam Pesach, and I don't know what's going on. You learn two Morim side by side. First night of Pesach, one is Shavuos, one is Pesach, one is Sukkot. They contradict each other. But if you're learning Shavuos on Maimah because today is Shavuos and you want to live Shavuos, today's a different life. Today's a different energy. And the month of Adar is a month of a mazel of Simcha, and a month of Nisan is the mazel of Geula, whatever, all the different things. And absolutely. Now, you could ask a bigger question, why did God create such a nuanced universe? Why didn't he just create 3-4 moods that we go through? It would be helpful also in Shalom Bayis, if that was the case. But that's not the case. So one of the answers to that question, by the way, is...
You want to... Yeah.
One of the answers to that question, by the way, is the blig vul pratim of existence reflects the blig vul diversity of atzmos. The Mittler Rebbe says, and I think the Rebbe Rashab brings it later, that itself, that infinite diversity is a reflection of the infinite unity, because God's unity is not one versus many. Can you put it on mute?
Doctor, please mute yourself.
What?
Please put yourself on mute.
Anyway, so bottom line is that there's things in the universe that express God's unity in the echad of God, the common denominator, but there are things that express God's diversity, meaning the ability to infinitely diversify. Because the fact that they exist, that you look at how many species are there in this world, it's like endless. I mean, obviously there's a limit, but it's really a tremendous amount. You can spend your whole life studying every one species, because it's reflective that God, that the fact that if He can do so many species, that shows you how many other things He could have done. In other words, it gives you an understanding of the bli gvul of Elokus in a way. The gvul is the structure, but the diversity gives you a sense of the magnitude. So marabu masacha, magadu masacha, that type of idea. And I was thinking about it the other day. I was also saying, I know it may sound simplistic, you make simple formulas, there's no such thing as simple formula. The bottom line is this, that we live in an acquisition-oriented society. What does that mean? Things are commodities and we go buy them, we acquire them. Transactions, we exchange, we purchase, we lease, we rent. You buy a loaf of bread, you buy a bottle of milk, you buy a house, sell a house, a car, etc., etc., etc. That's how we, especially in this day and age where everything is so quick and so on. Everything real in life cannot be acquired. You can't buy it. You can't buy love. You can't buy truth. You can't buy ideas. Yeah, you can buy, intellectual property, but I mean to say, 2 + 2 is 4. Either you get it or you don't get it. How do you get it? Do the opposite. You don't go out and get it. You have to get rid of all your layers, and it emerges. Flowers. You can buy flowers, but flowers are not created by a seed alone. You put a seed on the table, it won't grow. It goes into this earth, this mysterious earth. Mix it with water, nurture it. Suddenly flowers grow. Beauty. And I mean of all levels of beauty. So of course there's certain things that we can hone, we can develop, cultivate. Your talents, your mission. You can't buy your mission. No one can give you your mission. Your mission came with you, with your soul. So your soulfulness, sensitivity. I can give you a whole list of things. All these things emerge. And we are not trained in our society how to access things that emerge. So we try to apply the psychology of acquisition to the things that you can't acquire. And you get frustrated because you can't get it. You can't own it. You can't control it. And it's exactly what the Eibishter tells Moshe Rabbeinu. You want to see me? And you can't see me. You can't see me when you want to see me and live. Like the Rebbe's title, Pone Le'yaro. That says, Moshe says, I want to see your face, your glory. And Hashem says, no person can see me and live. And then he continues, you'll see my back, my face you won't see. So the Panim Yofis, the Rebbe brings it in Purim Sicha, Mem Ches, it's printed. Around Purim, Erev Purim maybe. That, what's the Eibishter rubbing it in? He already said you can't see me and live. Why does he say Pone Le'yaro? He says, okay, you'll see my back, I'm giving you something. I used to say again, no, but my face you won't see. And then the Rebbe asks, and then what about B'chal? What Moshe Rabbeinu was a smart man. What, he didn't understand you can't see God and be you? God has to tell it to him. Everyone understands that. If you know God, you are God. Iliyadai Teviyisiv is the expression, right? If I knew him, I'd be him. And why Taka did Moshe not get? And on the other hand, if Moshe asked, a tzaddik asks, and why is the Torah documented if he doesn't get what he is asking for? Why would the Torah document a request that wasn't fulfilled? Anyway, one answer answers it all. That it was fulfilled. Moshe asked to see his face. Abraham said, no one can see me and live. You can't be you and see me. Then it goes like this. It's supposed to read like this. Right? You'll see my back, my reflection. Upanai, and my face. But my face you'll see by Le'yaro when you stop looking. My back, reflection, you'll see through effort. You'll learn, you'll start getting a sense of God, so-called, through Yediyas Achiyuv. That's not really my essence. My essence you'll only be able to see when you stop wanting it. You have to shed yourself. shed your layers, shed your will, your desire, and I will emerge. It's unbelievable vart. More than a vart, it's all of life, really. Now, obviously, so you could ask the question, what do I need a chayrai? That's back to the interface, because it's not just, we're not talking about becoming eis mitzias. And I want to say something even more, Yossi. He asked the question. He was Meramis, right here in the beginning of this chapter. It's a good segue. 287. If you look in line, it's a very important line for the whole Hemshech, especially when you start learning it later. He says there's two types of yichud. Yichud l'mata l'mayla, or l'mayla l'mata. And he's saying no matter eich shenemer v'inyan yichud, the bottom line is saying that from Havaya can't be existence of the world because God is beyond existence. That's why you need a Elokim. We'll get to that later, but he says, so that's why we say Hashem Echad. You don't say Elokim Echad. You say Hashem Echad. Because there, what is dominant is the primary element of the unity. There's a world. So what do you mean? There's God in the world. So the answer is, that's why it's mitzvah la'achid Hashem. It's a mitzvah to unite God, which means we have to do something with the world. You can't just ignore it. So you could say the world is an illusion, but that's not Alpi Teda. Teda says, Bereshis bara Elokim, God created the world. That's our ace. So you have really two biyurim in Chassidus. And Ayin Beis is very, very fundamental. As he goes later, this becomes a very prominent element in the interface. Two ways to be miyachet. And here he says it briefly. I'll read it. That world, there's a world, but the world after it exists is just like before it exists. This is essentially Shayichad V'Amunah. That's Shayichad V'Amunah, the whole Shayichad V'Amunah. That Batsim is Le'elam Hashem V'Chonitzu B'Shamayim, and it's concealed. If the eye was given permission to see, you'd see the whole world would be mamish kamay sheishes lifnei sheishes meibreishis. That's the techen of Shaykh Amur. Then he goes on and says, "Oi, shemetzius gufahu alakus." It's a different beer completely. That there's a metzius, the metzius itself alakus, and these are the shnei basic finding yichum the matla ma'ila mamayla mata. Mamatla ma'ila is bitla elamis. Mamayla mata is yichud elamis. In other words, that Welt itself is a Metzias. Now these two things you ask about is and Kelm, this one second, which one is it?
Milo is a Metzias?
Metzias, but Metzias Guf is Elokus. That's Milo Mat. It's the higher one. Now why am I mentioning? I think I mentioned it last week, that Rebbe Rashal, I think the last night of his life on this earth, and he was in the middle of his sleep speaking, Kavyochel delirious, and heat, and Ashkafta the Rebbe, the words he says is Anashama Gate Ace. I think the Lashon is from the Yichud, from Yichud Mamayla Lamata, Yichud from Dasa and Dastach, something like that. Which Bechal is unbelievable, that's what the Rebbe says, and he's in like high temper, which means in a sense we say Moshe Rabbeinu, 49 gates of Bina he reached, and the 50th gate he could only reach when he went and had Nun Boy. In other words, and that's why it's called Chelos Ava. His whole life was aspiring to that 50th. And I guess a tzaddik like Rabbi, the last minute, that's when they say they're able to reach the thing that they couldn't reach. In Zman HaGolus, obviously, it can be done in a way that's Neshama B'Guf, you have to say, at the end of the day. But the point I'm trying to say is, so which one is it? These two are not so simple. It is again. You could say, okay, fine. There's a dance, and fine. There's this. This is, and the answer is, and this is very connected to some of Vav and Ayin Beis. The answer is, ultimately, you need to do both in the interface, and combine both. That the Welt is like not a Welt, and the Welt Metzias Guf is Elokus. And there's really two ways in Aveda. Like for example, the difference between Torah and Tefillah. That's what he explains. Torah. Ayin Beis is clearly more Torah than Tefillah. Some of is more tefillah than Torah. Some of is more that Vedas Habirurim. Through the hard work, you reach the place that's beyond existence. And here, very much more that existence itself is Elokus. And there are two different approaches. So first, you have to know both of them as separate approaches. But then, ultimately, there is a way of uniting the two, because you're ultimately connecting it with Atzmus, and there is really two ways that the connection happens. What I'm trying to say is that it's like when a person comes to the end of the journey where they realize everything is one. It's not the same knowledge to the person who in the beginning says, 1 second, if everything is one, why do you have to learn the whole thing? Why don't you just tell it to me in the beginning? Because it's like someone's going to learn Encyclopedia Talmudic and is going to think he knows Shas as a result. You don't know Shas. The person who comes to the end of his learning and his understanding, even though someone who hasn't begun learning will say, 1 second, I could also know that I don't know anything. That I don't know that comes after all the learning is not the I don't know that comes from the further learning. And there's no shortcuts, What I'm trying to say is that it's only when you really go into the details, nitty-gritty of each one of them, and understand it well, then comes a point where you can say, I could begin to understand that these two can come together. And it's not a contradiction. You see, ultimately, it is being at peace with the paradox, and being at peace with let's say at the end of the day, Eretz and Kalim will be united. And you'll ask the question, 1 second, Eir reflects the Gilei Atzmos. The Yesh of the Keli reflects the Atzmos itself. So what do we have here? Two experiences? There comes a point where it becomes so one, and you can see it from the eyes of Atzmos itself. But you're not ready at this point to go there because we're not Atzmos. But there comes a point where you could see it from the eyes of Atzmos, and then you'll see three things. You'll see Eid, you'll see Keli, and then you'll see how they're completely seamless. And that's ultimately Dira B'Tachtim. That's what he wanted. You could say, 1 second, but they were seamless before all of existence. Why did he need the whole game for? No, he wanted it that Eris and Kalim should understand that. That's the Chiddush. That God has a paradigm that he can encompass Gvul and Blikvul. What's the Chiddush? That a Gvul should come to a place where not only it can be united with Blikvul, but it can be in a place that's beyond Gvul and Blikvul and all that. That's a fundamental Chiddush. That's a sign of real Atzmos power. But it didn't come through Atzmos, it came through our hard work. Now, can we talk about it? We can talk about it, but you can't see it and live until you really divest of yourself. And that's the hard part. And that's also difficult because initially we divest and we say, okay, if I become Batul, then I become Yesh Metzias. So how my Metzias is ever going to become one with Elokus? Understand? But the fact is, Bittul is not annihilation. The fact that you suspend yourself and you become a container for Atzmos, ultimately your Metzias will be permeated, and it's going to be you and not you at the same time. You look in Teira Shalom, Simchas Teira, Tafrei Shayin Dalet, he says those words. If you have a Teira Shalom, there's a few lines there, I'll bring it next week. He says, it is faran, it is nicht faran. It's beide, so faran and nicht faran. It's there and it's not there at the same time. Now, most of us would say that's a contradiction of terms. Interestingly, lahavdil, people in the Far Eastern disciplines have no problem with that expression. It's a common expression. It is and it isn't at the same time. But for us, it's hard because in the Western world, as I said, we live in a world of tangible reality. It's a table or a chair. What are you telling me? What do you mean it's both? What do you mean it's not both? It's a table or a chair. And it's a simple klotzkasha. But once again, who told you that your parameters are reality? Who told you these parameters of table and chair are one? I mentioned, I think, that talk that she gave at the TED conference. There's this woman, a neuroscientist. So she became a neuroscientist because her brother had schizophrenia. So she wanted to, understand the brain. One fine day, as God would have it, she has a stroke. Now she knows the dynamics of a stroke inside out. She gives this 15-minute talk. It's not a religious talk at all. You have to see this talk. You won't believe. Pure chassidus. Pure chassidus from complete experience. It's mind-blowing, just the parallel. That because you think it's like, I'll tell you exactly what she says. She says the following. I'll send you a link. Her name is, I forget her name. Just look, it's a neuroscientist, one of the top.
Is she the one that wrote The Stroke of Insight?
Could be,
My
yeah,
Stroke of
yeah,
Insight.
yeah. My Stroke of Insight.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Good word
yeah.
for you.
That's the talk based on Stroke of Insight. It's Stroke of Insight. So bottom line is like this: she gets a stroke on the left side of her brain. Okay, the left side of the brain there's the right and left side of the brain. The right brain is sees everything in a field of energy, as she puts it. The left brain is what sees details. So you take a toothbrush and toothpaste, that's your example. The fact that you can pick up the toothbrush is because you have a left brain. If you only had a right brain, you just understand it all in a concept. You wouldn't even know how to, you couldn't make your fingers to be mitzamtzim them, to limit them to pick it up, because that's, the right brain sees everything as a field of energy. It's actually right is chesed, so everything's united. Gvura is discernment, and distinction is left. Okay, so her side, so
But in the body comes the opposite, no?
yeah, right. But bottom line is the stroke starts, and it's a slow stroke, so it starts affecting her. And she says, but physically she begins to see things that are details, and everything melts away, and she cannot do anything detailed. She sees a field of energy. So imagine suddenly the table, the chair, everything. Think of it all as particles on top of an invisible net. And now you only see the net. And the particles start disappearing. They don't disappear, but you see them as like details. You know, it's like think of it like this. You know, when you begin to read a book or a sefer, in the beginning you see words. After a while you hear an idea, you even lose sight of the words. The words are just the technical way how the idea was constructed. You know, like you look at a face. There's an example actually. You remember there was a famous book, Drawing from the Right Side with your right side of the brain? Unbelievable experiment. Most people can't draw a face, right? Try to draw a face. Try to draw my face. It's not impossible. And the question is why? I mean, artists can do it. Why can't we do it? So this artist wrote. So she did an experiment. She had everybody try to draw a face of Abraham Lincoln. Here's Abraham Lincoln, classic face on the penny, Lincoln penny. You know, the beard and everything. And everybody looked at the pictures. You know, it was a joke. One was worse than the next. You know, try it out. You'll see. Then she had everybody turn over the picture of Lincoln, and now try to draw it. 90% improvement by everybody, because they didn't see a face anymore. They saw only details. So only to draw the nose was just a line, and they just copied the line. Seeing the face did not let them create it, because they see a face, they don't know how to see details. So they see the entirety of something, you can't really break it down.
It's like
So
in typesetting, laying out the paper,
Yeah.
turn it upside down, you see the lines at the
Yeah.
ends. Remember
Yeah, artists also do that.
Box.
yeah, so no, exactly, because when you look at my face, yeah, you see my eyes in this, but what is dominant in the image in your mind is the full entire face, and that's impossible to draw. What an artist can do is look at a face and separate and really, takes a big skill, because it's not just separate. I'm just going to look at your eye. It really knows how to look at an eye. So bottom line is the universe. On one hand, to the naked eye, it's a bunch of details. To the trained eye, it's one entity that has a bunch of little components, like a jigsaw puzzle. So a bird is here. Now we study it. We know now. If the oceans didn't do what they did, and the forests didn't do what they did, and the animals didn't do what they did, the whole world would not be able to be balanced. So we study it piece by piece. But someone was able to see the picture. So 1 second, this machine, if this spring and this wheel doesn't turn, the rest of the thing doesn't turn. So they see one machine. They don't see like machshava dumadak. It's one snapshot. And that's what she basically describes, that field of energy, she calls it. Everything's a field of energy. One field of energy that just has a lot of components to it. So the real challenge, and this is the chiddush, is that we're trying to combine the two worlds. The world of details with that field of energy. And one should not be compromised. And that's not simple to do. Because we begin, that's what Dira b'tachtenim means. The Alter Rebbe writes in Perek Lamed Vav. Tachtenim, not in mokim. Tachtenim in teichen, in content. It's tachten as far as it can get from godliness. What does that mean? It doesn't mean evil as opposed to good. That's part of it. It means a distinction as opposed to unity. It means tachtenim, that it's so concealed, the underlying unity. And then he goes on and says, Ad shemol klippos v'sitra achre. Till it's levels. The first step is that it's separate details. That's already antithetical to the concept of unity. We don't see things as a picture. Look at life. Who's it that said that? One of the philosophers said, you could only understand life backwards, but you have to live life frontwards. Okay? So if you look at that backwards, it's a bunch of frames in a film. But you don't know what the frames are coming. A film, hey, don't say anything, the story's not over yet, But we live in details. That always brings it with Purim. That Purim took 9 years to happen. You live during the time, you think it's a bunch of random things. Achashverosh happens to be a king. He happens to have a party. He gets angry at his wife. It happens to be that Bixen Viserys is overheard by Mordechai. Then the king happens to have a sleepless night. How many sleepless nights do we have, But the Megillah takes all the dots, puts them all in order. A pattern emerges. And suddenly you have a miracle. Everyone's in the right place, the right time. Esther and Malka, all that. But if you think about it, you're living 9 years. Hey, it's a bunch of things, a bunch of details. They have no connection to one to the next. It's connecting the dots. Now, it's hard to discern these patterns, but when you discern a pattern, when you see a pattern, it changes the whole picture. The problem is that it's not just that it's complicated, it's painful too, because when you lose sight of the big picture, and people start hurting each other, it's like the Moshe Chassidus, the father hides from the child in order for the child to have ingenuity to find him, and then the child gives up. And that's when the problems begin. We misunderstand why God concealed himself. He concealed himself in order to find, so we should connect the dots. And then we stop searching. Remember then the Rebbe started crying? And the child stopped searching, and the father is crying because his son stopped looking. And it's over. He starts doing other things. And that's where we are. So you wander away so far. But God took this risk. The risk he took because the stakes are so high. But that's what he wants. He wants a world that on its own is compartmentalized and fragmented and blind. He wants it to figure out, to connect the dots and retrace its steps and connect to that. And that is in some way greater than what Atzmus itself can see. And that he can't do for us. So it comes down to. And that's where it makes a difference. That's what makes a difference. What exactly it achieves in Atzmus? So it's Nesava, it's a taiva at the end of the day. So we have to deal with God's taivas. Taivas of consequence. This desire, the first taiva of them all, is beyond reason. Like a taiva stuck in kashas, of a taiva stuck in kasha. But because the taiva is the etzem wants this. I mean, it's hard, your seichel, our seichel persists to want to understand why he wanted it. Ultimately, the why is out of place because there is no why yet in a taiva. He created a why because of the desire. So you're not going to be able to understand the desire. The desire created logic. So you want to know why he had a desire to create logic. That's a good question, But the fact is, some way we try to understand it. On our terms, there's ways to understand things. You understand it, that maybe it's shleimus wants deeper shleimus, whatever it is. But even that is not really an answer because shleimus doesn't need a deeper shleimus. But the bottom line is that like it says in Chassidus, what he wants we know. Why he wants we don't know. So what he wants is that we should retrace it and connect. I want to just add one thing just for the picture. I always had this dilemma, and then I remember the Rebbe said Sicha Shlach Mem Zayin, and that's mamish connected to this. Perek Aleph of Tanya, the Perek Beis of Tanya seemed to, if you didn't know they were one mechaber, they seem to be written by two different authors. There's almost no similarity between Perek Aleph and Chelik Rishayich V'Amunah.
Oh, Chelik Aleph, Chelik Beis.
Yeah, Chelik. Except Perek Chaf and Chaf Aleph, where it talks a little about bittul elements, but generally. Tzadik Ben Yerosha, Birer Elam, the war between the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, Ava Mishateres. There's not one of them. In Sheikh V'Amunah, you don't even have words like Ava, and Yira, and Nefesh Habam is Nefesh Shalikis. Sheikh V'Amunah is like completely about Yichud, about Elamis, do they exist, don't they exist, the Bittul of Elamis, the Tzimtzum, all that. And it goes further. The Alter Rebbe had a Havamina. His first consideration was to write the second Shaykh Ramina first. That's why there's once he writes Kfishis Bar Le'el in the Agdamah there. So the Rebbe, so it's interesting, but the end of the conclusion was not. So the Rebbe says in the Sicha Shlach Mem Zayin, it's printed in Sefer, it's Mugil. Very fascinating explanation there. He says that there's two things, there's two you say this. One is that the world is bottled. Bittul Elmas and Birer Elmas. Shaykh of Amunah talks about bittul elements, like Yichud Mamat Lamayl. And Tanya, the Kutay Morim, is bitter elements, Mamayl Lamata. And Tzias itself. No, in this context, it's
in the way
the Tzias itself
Uh-huh.
and the Metzius itself is Elokus.
Right.
Whereas Bittul would be that the world is as if it didn't exist, as if it's before. In this context, is what the first one is Mamat L'mayel, the second one. Mamat L'mayel means that you Mavatl the world, basically. It's correct. In other places, Birur would be Mamat L'mayel, but here it's as far as whether it's and Tanya, like the Dir B'Tachtem is not even mentioned in Shaykh L'Emunah. If you know Shaykh L'Emunah, you finish with Shaykh L'Emunah on its own, you come to discover, hey, the whole world is not real. What's real is the Kayach Eliki. That's basically. When you finish Perek, the first Chelik in Tanya, the Kutei Morim, Dir B'Tachtenim. And the Beinani is the bottom line of Veda, that he has to fight the war. It's mamish two different things, but it's exactly these two things. And they're very distinct. And you need both. So the Havamina was to begin with the Bittul. But the Maskana is that it's higher is the Birur. And then you learn that it's really Bar. And they ultimately connected to each other.
How do you, how does what you just explained jive or interface with what you said earlier that if
Jive is a good word. The slang for the interface is jive. Okay. So we can say Ayin Beis is a jive, a jive jam session. Huh?
Jive.
How does Asper's jive with the existence?
That's it.
Okay.
You said earlier that we're in acquisitions of people, and that the only thing is the real truth can't be acquired; it just emerges.
No, but through work,
Things.
you have to
So
work.
you wanted to add that because you say stripping yourself, you're stripping your.
Yeah, when I say it emerges, it doesn't mean emerge. If you have a yara lov ruach memorim and God is graceful, He'll send you a gili. But emerging is through hard work.
So which is acquisition of knowledge. It's a process of acquisition. You
No,
got
but you don't acquire. But
the whole idea is
that's what it is.
putting
The
all
Shar
the-
Hanun, you can't count. You have to count 49, and then the 50th emerges.
Okay. But it is an acquisition of knowledge of God through Yigatu Matsasi within.
No, but
Hasidus means the
but
Torah.
no. But it's not semantics. It's not an acquisition-oriented entity. It's there, and you just and the only way to get it is by and then it's just there. So it's not acquired.
I mean, when you say stripping yourself away,
Right.
really what we're doing is delving into something, building building a knowledge rather than
Would you just
stripping away.
you want
It's not just stripping
but
away our knowledge of
why
economics and politics in the secular world.
But why are you
and
so-
of godliness.
But why are you so connected to the word acquisition? Why do you want to make it an acquisition? It's not an acquisition.
What is it?
No,
Discovery.
It's a good
It's a
question.
discovery.
It's called emergence.
So it's an avoda of emergence.
I gave an example. A loaf of bread you can buy. Love you can't. It's a major difference. You
But
can't
then-
buy it no matter how much money in the
But
world.
you're talking about earning the 49 gates.
Yes.
No, what earning is not acquiring. Earning means you do certain things and then something emerges. A loaf of bread, you can do all the stripping as well. You won't have it. It's not, you don't have a loaf of bread inside yourself.
Without the learning, you're not even gonna know what is there.
What are you trying to tell me? That there's no work
If you haven't
involved?
learned something.
There's a Veda involved. Yes, there's a
No,
lot
it's
of work
positive.
involved.
One was
But
this-
one gets it through going outside of you, and the other one is there. A soul you cannot acquire. A soul is given to you by God. Now the question is whether you can access it. And how do you access it is through stripping the layers. Other things you have to go and acquire. For example, learning Torah, by the way, you could also suggest it's not acquirement. You learned 9 months in your mother's womb, and you're just regaining what you always knew. And it got concealed. It's a whole different way of looking at reality. Where is God? Wherever you let Him in.
Can you meet us?
It's not outside of you. In other words, it's the whole concept, by the way, of acquisition is really false. Is a very limited perception. It's seeing existence as the object and the subject are separate.
What do you do with Mishakana Hakma?
It's only a material world.
Mishakana Hakma, okay.
What's the condition?
What's that?
So the different meaning, right?
You gain something.
I mean, what? This is not semantics here. This is a fundamental different experience.
Can you meet us?
What are we saying? We're saying that as a matter of fact, I would say there's a harder Aveda to merge than to acquire. Acquire is easy. You have money, you go buy life abroad. You don't have to do anything. There's no efforts at all.
But you're saying
The only effort is to make a little money.
can you meet us todos doesn't mean that you acquire something, it means you acquire the ability to something within you emerges.
What?
Can you meet us todos?
Or Kinyan Hakma.
But what's that? Are we now into like finding everywhere it says the word Kinyan?
No,
I mean,
I want an explanation.
I explained the concept.
Position.
That's what's up. Before we apply it to anything, let's just look at, is the concept make sense or not?
Yes.
It's too, yes or no? Forget about anything else you
No,
learned.
that's why I'm having difficulty making the difference.
You're still there?
Kinyan, external and Kinyan.
I didn't use the word kinyan, you did. So let's get that. So you're bringing things I didn't bring in.
Acquisition external, emergence
Mute,
internal.
mute.
I'm having a difficulty making difference between the vote of emergence,
Mute,
internal
mute.
emergence, what it consists of. And why it's not called acquisition.
I understand the question.
Doctor, mute, please.
I'm having a difference having a difficulty making a difference between what we're calling the vote of the existence of acquisition, which one acquires different objects, external,
Hang it up and that's it.
and what it means, the
Dr.
vote
Simon said if you don't behave, you're out of the class.
what it means the vote of internally, that we don't use a much of acquisition. Why don't we say we acquire
Mute.
different levels in our level of service? Why don't we use that kind of language also? It's also in the voter.
This is semantics to me. It's not,
So then
it's complete semantics.
clarify the issue.
You tell me however you understand the difference between counting 49 days and the 50th, that's applied to that, that's all.
I'm only,
Let's
I'm only
simplify
concerned,
matters.
I'm only concerned.
Whatever, no second.
Yeah.
If there's 49 days, the 50th. One is counted, the 50th emerges after you count 49. However you understand the distinction is what I say.
49, you don't
Let's not
get
even
the
go for
50.
it.
The 49 is the learning,
We're only
building
concerned about
up
the
so you're
49.
able to receive the 50.
Okay, I'm saying that you know. However you understand that, do you have a problem with that, 49 and 50, the difference?
Not at all.
So that's let's say that for a practical purpose. I went further than that, but if that helps, let's keep it there.
Is the conclusion of what you've been telling us that this Sefer Ayin Beis is the ultimate of Hasidus and the manual for completing the mission that we've intended for?
Obviously, you can't say that because then the Rabbi wouldn't say Mamorim afterwards. You know, I would just say that in encyclopedic form, Ayin Beis is like they call the Rabbi Rashab the Rambam of Chassidus. So after the Rambam, we didn't stop learning Torah. The Rambam wrote the Rambam, then came Shulchan Aruch, in other words. The Ayin Beis, he brings all the fundamental sugyas, all the fundamental themes of Chassidus into one umbrella. Yeah, you probably can use Ayin Beis as a prism to see all of Chassidus. But there's a lot of stuff the Rebbe adds, the Friedrich Rebbe adds. There's actually Maimorim and Ayin Beis that the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe elaborates. We'll come to places where pages and pages just on a few lines in Ayin Beis. So Ayin Beis clearly is a fundamental. You see the Rebbe, the resistance the Rebbe had to publish it.
For 10 years the Rebbe said Ayin Beis. No? How many years did the Rebbe say Ayin Beis?
No, not in many Maimorim all over. But I'm saying, but in Lamed Zayin when he published it, it was like the whole thing. It was not so simple. What was the resistance? No other Chassidus was there resistance to publish. The Rebbe didn't publish without resistance. There's a whole sikha the Rebbe spoke. He said that he didn't say. He said the Friedrich Rebbe didn't give permission to do it. So he knows that this should be done, but he doesn't want to take the full achrayus, so he's throwing it into Chassidim, among Chassidim, and everyone should give $1. And no names are printed in it. It's the only sefer. There's no the Rebbe's signature is not. The Rebbe's name is not even mentioned. It doesn't say Al Pi Heirah from the Rebbe to publish it. The Rebbe and no one signs. Look, you'll see just a date, and no, there are no credits. And so clearly, and the Rebbe that was Tav Shalom Zayin. You just kiss it. That sikh is printed, I think.
Oh, that's that he added.
Yeah.
It was a Kivan's.
No, but here, Medivrei Rabbeinu B'Srael Kov Kislev Tav Shalom Zayin. There's a summary of what the Rebbe said in the beginning of the. So Ayin Beis is clearly no other Maimorim was like that. The only other time you have something like that is Yutas Kislev, Chassidus in general. The Alter Rebbe was arrested. So to explain it, I'll tell you the truth. Maybe when we'll finish learning it, you begin to see what it is. I mean, clearly, I see what I could say. Learning Chassidus, the comparison, the thoroughness, the also the openness. How he talks about things, Eris and Kalim. In other Maimorim, you don't have such a type of personalization. It's still deep, and still needs explanation to make it accessible. But clearly, it's in a different league. You know, go learn a Maimon after you learn this. It's a relief. You know, this is like relentless. This is just a barrage. No matter what, however, if you think you're out of it, it's just a whole new. To understand all that, now we need to learn another 100 pages. That's basically the whole approach here. And at the end, he's not finished. He never finished writing it. So he ends up with questions he never answers.
Even the Chilik Shlomo.
Yeah.
Where does he say that everything is
Okay.
built up Seichel? The approach to the Eibishter creating the world is up Niyus and up Seichel.
Is my modern that say clearly that the Eibush wanted it to be Al Pi Seichel, and that's why it's
You saw this from Chassidus?
Yeah,
Brought
yeah.
from Kabbalah earlier?
it's Merumas, but Chassidus is the main Chabad, especially Chabad.
Actually,
None of the Talmidei HaMagid created a Seichel. What the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe is creating Chabad Chassidus is the biggest testimony to a new derech. No one ever did that before. You learn Eitz Chaim, things that he explains to you. There's no way you could understand it. It's completely cryptic there. I mean, I guess the Arizal and his Talmidim, they could see what we're reading here.
No,
But,
I think he's asking something else. I think what he's saying is the principle that the Abishah created the world in a way that matches, that can...
No,
that's up Seichel.
yeah.
That's up Seichel.
That itself, in the Rebbe Marash, it starts in the Rebbe Marash and other places, there's a few places, where Kach Ola B'Ritzene, it should be Al Pi Seichel, the way we have our Seichel today. Does that say anywhere? Yeah, in Shem Ramunim, I saw in some Kabbalah's from they describe it, but it's elaborated in Chassidus. No, but my point was, I understand what his question was. My point was that Chassidus Chabad, the Alter Rebbe just doing that is itself
That's all.
because basically the Rebbe in Tofresh Pei Hey, there's the Maimer Yutes Kislev Maimer Ze'ayem Tchilas Masach, I think. So the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe uses the lashon that Chassidus Chabad is Elokus and Slavish b'Seichel. It's not Seichel trying to understand Elokus. It's Elokus that's a Slavish in Chabad. In Ayin Beis, it's Mamish says it b'Feidish. But that Chabad Chassidus is that type of thing. It's Elokus and manifests in Chabad. So let's continue. Reish Pei Zayin. I'll sum up what we're up to here.
By the way, your answer, your whole explanation was clear, but I just wanted to get a more of a deeper insight with the Avodah 49 gates.
I understand. There are things we can. There's a Susa de Latat that brings in a Susa de Leil.
You didn't get there.
1 second. And then there's an Susa de Leil that comes after the Susa de Leil that comes through a Susa de Latat. What's called Basar Shlim. Leishayab el Basar Shlim. The Rebbe brings it right off. It's similar to Shar Hanun. That Aveda directly. I mentioned before, there's two ways that Moshe Rabbeinu experiences Elokus, or that we do. Yediyas Achiyuv. You know, we have wisdom, so you know that God has wisdom. We have chesed, you know that God has chesed. Then Mahu Chanan Afata Chanan. So we emulate God in God's midas. That's one thing. Alachta B'drachav. Then there's a way to experience godliness through Yediyas Hashnila, through extrapolation. We have Chachma, God has Chachma. No, how could he have our Chachma? So you have to say, Less Chacham v'lei b'chachma yediyah. Chakim v'lei b'chachma yediyah. He has Chachma only because we can't say he doesn't have Chachma. So it's basically, it's like saying he doesn't not have Chachma. That's really. So God's Chachma is completely different than our Chachma. So you can't directly experience it. You can experience it by saying, our Chachma is not, God does not exist, but not like we exist. So there's a different way. So you're seeing God's back or God's reflection. That's direct. You're seeing a reflection. So a reflection. You look at, for example, you look up at the sun rising. It's a reflection of a certain God's presence in our lives. You know, parnosa. You see a gift in your life. So God's present. But then, called Sevu Kalam if you want. God says the only way to see me is by not looking. Stop, close your eyes, and now you experience something that you have to say that this God that created existence must be something far beyond existence. What it is exactly? I don't know what it is, but I know what it's not. No, it's not us. And then you begin to extrapolate, and you come to a certain perception through the negative, and that's not by looking. And you see the face by not looking, and suddenly you can experience the face. So one is through a direct Aveda, one is through stripping yourself. You know, and the best explanation in all these things is the explanation from the Alter Rebbe in the Likutei Torah when he explains it Tzimtzum. You know, that's where you see, by the way, Chabad applying to, you know, we say Kabbalah is a beer, the Midrash said it's not Chassidus, it's a beer in Kabbalah, Kabbalah is a beer in Chassidus. So Alter Rebbe, we saw it here, even here, we took the Metzach, and all that. At the end of being, you realize that Kabbalah is really a beer and Chassidus, what the real Indian is. So there, the Alter Rebbe gives the classic example, the teacher and the student. And I think it answers a lot of questions when you think about that mashal in everything we're talking about. So you have like this, you have a brilliant teacher who, if he did not conceal or in any way contract and somewhat limit his intelligence, just would say everything he knows, no way that all the students would be overwhelmed. Very clear. So what he has to do is, first of all, tzimtzum harish, is to conceal all that intelligence. Okay, but that's not enough. The next thing is you need a stream of consciousness, which is the kav. So he begins to speak. He begins to transmit. What is he trying? A very narrow line. A, B, C, D. What's happening with the student? The student now is being spoon-fed letters, words, ideas. The student has no clue where it's going. And the teacher suddenly opens up all the pipes, all the channels, the faucet. The student will get lost again. So it has to constantly be a stream that fits. But what's really happening is the containers of the student are expanding and being nurtured and being cultivated. As they expand, the stream can begin to go faster or more. Let's put it this way, the faucet, you open the faucet. Suddenly you start hearing things. Now you start saying, that's what I learned last year, now I understand. The kalim begin to go wider and wider, expand. As they expand, they draw more energy, more air, to a point, like you bring this is in Samachva right in the beginning, he says, to the point where the Talmud, let's say Mem Shana, after 40 years, suddenly now he has the Lev Ladas, the whole person there, and he's able to say, now I understand what my Rav really meant. So you could say the kalim of the student have become like the kalim of the teacher. He uses that lashon, Chushei HaMakabel became like Chushei HaRav. And even further, he can now surpass. He may even reach places. So in Samach Vav, he's asked the question, what's the Chiddush? So we're back to square one. The Erev Shaltifnei Tzimtzum had all that before. What's the big thing? So he says two answers. One is, the big thing is that it was not in Kalim before. It was not, the Talmud could never be related. And second, there's a new Er Chadash that comes, once it goes into the Kalim, there's an Er Chadash that even Lifnei Tzimtzum didn't have. In other words, there's deeper wisdom than the wisdom of the teacher, no matter how brilliant he was. That's the two things, and that's the whole Samach Vav goes off in that Chiddush. That's Samach Vav. Ayin Beis, I would say, is more how it fits in the Kalim. Not so much the Er Chadash, actually. But the point I'm saying is, here you have a perfect example. So when you ask a question, where do we stand? Erev Kalim, it depends where the student is. The Mashpia obviously knows the intelligence before he begins. That's why the Tzimtzum doesn't affect his Eir. He didn't become stupider, one of the signs, didn't become less intelligent because he's concealed his energy. It just doesn't reveal it to the student. So, but from the student's point of view, there's a major difference. How much is flowing. And this is Alter Rebbe's mashal on Eitz Chaim, to explain the kav, the tzimtzum, the Eir Ein Sof, the tzimtzum and the kav. And then how the kav broadens until that space, the black hole where the tzimtzum was, suddenly gets so filled with energy. That's Mashiach, where the kalim have become completely, and then we say, Eishes Chayla Teres Baila, that the keli is deeper than the Eir even. That's the end of the end picture. So you have everything going on right over there. Now, why is it complicated? Because in the teaching process, this is what he says earlier here in the Samshach, as the air goes into the keli, there's always something above the head of the student. There's always a makif that remains makif. So there's something that he understands, and there's something that's beyond him. So you're always, wherever you're learning, a healthy class is that you went away saying, I understood something, but there's things I still don't understand. If you understood too much, or you don't understood, or you didn't understand anything, that's a problem. What you want to have is the Kalim got a little exercise, they got a little expansion, but now they realize there's a lot more. And there's nothing wrong with that. The mystique has to always remain there. You need always Pnimi and Mak. As a matter of fact, there's a beautiful lashon in Eitz Chaim that he brings in Samach Vav right in the beginning of the first Mem. He says that that Er Makif is Mitzach Sech HaKeli, Mebachutz and Befrim. It's like tickles. It tickles the Keli. It's like you sense, when you sense something's beyond you, you just can't put your word, it's like it's tickling you. That's the expression in Eitz Chaim. It's a beautiful, in other words, you realize there's something beyond, I didn't get something here. But that itself prepares you to get it. Because first of all, you want it, And you're sensing it. You're sensing it, but you don't yet fully internalize it. And this process continues. It's climbing the ladder. It's a ladder. And the good thing with the ladder is that even when you put your foot to the next step, you still can keep your foot on the earlier step, so you don't lose your balance. And that way, your comfort zone is not completely taken away from you. That would be difficult. Like, suddenly you have to jump 5 steps, it would not be, you'd be left dangling. You want to be able to.
Zo is dat groen.
Why is Kabbalah beer on Chassidus?
Because when we learned before about Metzach, for example, or even you start realizing that the Metzach, even though it came first in Eitz Chaim, but the sugi, the understanding of it is much higher than just Metzach. Metzach is, Kabbalah is a marshal for Chassidus to understand how Etzem enters existence. That's what it is. Kabbalah is a way of understanding it in the level of Sayyid. So Pshat would explain it to the level of Pshat, and Kabbalah explains it with Kabbalah, Kabbalistic terminology. It's very clear. It's almost like Kabbalah is a marshal of Chassidus.
In other words,
But by us, for states, who's going to go to Kabbalah for a marshal? Because you have to be Mekubal to do that, because Kabbalah is quite complicated. For us, we start off with Metzach is okay, what's a marshal to understand Metzach is? But when we learned it here, clearly the Metzach is lower. The Metzach is an example to understand how Er Atzmi, what do we say, breaks through. Yeah, I'll take some seltzer if you
Seltzer? Oh, wat morgen. Hoe staat je?
What were you saying?
in other words, Kabbalah was trying to bring down the Likus in a way that we understood, and they couldn't find any clearer language than Kabbalah language. They couldn't bring it down any more lower or clearer, other than Kabbalah language. Kabbalah Chassidus brings it in a way that we can mamish understand it in a whole new manner. So now the Kabbalah, Mishalim,